Hi, everybody. I want to thank Kim and Marty for inviting me to speak at this conference, and I want to thank everybody in the room and everybody listening online for everything you're doing to defend fair and safe sport for females. As an athlete, I've faced many challenges, like trying to run 26.2 miles really fast. But I have to say the challenge I face right now is the biggest yet, namely keeping a room full of conference goers who are thinking about a delicious meal and alcoholic drinks awake and paying attention. This is going to be quite difficult for me, but bear with me, I'll do my best. So by way of brief introduction, I became a full-time elite athlete in distance running at the age of 33, which obviously is very old by elite athlete standards. Before that, I spent many years as a grassroots level athlete, so through school, teenage years, as a student, and then while I was working as a diplomat. So my development pathway from beginner to elite was very long, 24 years in total. I had a dream to become an Olympic athlete or a world-class athlete when I was 11 years old, watching the LA Olympics. And it wasn't until 24 years later that I stood on the start line of an Olympics in Beijing in 2008. So I hope that shows you that the development pathway is tough, it's long, it's important for reaching elite level. My personal best in the marathon is 2:23:12, and to follow on from the Jamaican goddesses in running that we heard from Ross about, in 2009, when I ran that time, I was ranked second in the world in women's road running, but in that year alone, the number of males who ran faster than me was at least 1,300. So I hope that fact in and of itself shows you why the female category must exist. One of the things which gave me a dream to be an elite athlete when I was watching the LA Olympics was Daley Thompson winning the decathlon. He's chief turf of the male athletes in the UK. Thank you, Daley. So he was my hero, and I had posters of him on my wall. And, but strangely enough, it was him that nearly derailed my development pathway before it even got going, because after he won his gold medal for the second time, he came to Oxford, which was where I was living, to sign autographs. So I went along as an 11-year-old by myself, and I had very short hair, and I waited patiently, and I got to the desk, and I said, "Can I have your autograph, please?" And he said, "How are you, young man?" And so this is nearly 40 years before the verb misgendering even existed. So this was my first experience of misgendering, and I sobbed all the way home. But I forgave him, and Daley, if you're listening, you're still my hero. So, yeah, anyway, I got over the misgendering. And bizarrely, here we are, Daley and I are now on Team Turf trying to help defend the female category all those years later. So the key message I want to emphasize today is this, that women and... Can you still hear? Yep. Women and girls deserve fair and safe sport at all levels, not just at elite level. So that means grassroots level, junior, recreational, but also masters level. We haven't heard much today about masters level sport, but this is really critical. It's not just about elite level female athletes. And in order for females of all those ages and abilities to have fair and safe sport, there must be 0 males in the female category. Females are different to males, as we all know. We're not hobbled males, medicated males, surgically or in any other way altered males, and we're certainly not a level of testosterone. We're simply a different sex to males, and therefore we must have a female-only category. Having spent my entire life doing sport of various kinds, it's always been very clear to me that the female category must be exclusively for females only, at all ages and all levels. I've therefore found it really quite shocking to hear several times the argument that goes, we must have fairness at elite level, but lower down we must prioritize inclusion. I've heard this from at least 5 very senior people in athletics who live and breathe athletics every day. What this argument says in reality is, yes, fairness does matter because we think we need it at elite level, but only for a tiny number of women who are good at sport. For women who are not that good at sport, they must accept some discrimination because the feelings of men are more important. And this is just completely wrong. So let me just explain why I think it's wrong. The first reason is the development pathway. So as I said, it took me 24 years. It's a years, sometimes decades-long process, progressing from beginner to elite. I was part of a short film recently called The Inclusion Delusion, and if you haven't watched it, I strongly encourage you to do it. It's on YouTube. And in that film, I said, no elite athlete is born elite. We all start as beginners, as children, and work our way up to the top. And this journey takes a huge amount of hard work and sacrifice. So I mentioned the dream I had at age 11. After that, I did many different sports as a child, never at elite level, although I did go to a swimming club until I was 15 years old. My parents woke up on countless early mornings to take me to swimming training and gave me many opportunities in sport. I didn't start running seriously until I was 18. And then I had to put running on the back burner for 10 years because I wasn't good enough to earn a living as an athlete and had to work instead. So I spent 10 years working and training, trying to progress my training to a level where I could stop working and earn a living as an athlete. Over many years, I made sacrifices, missed milestone family events, and had to forego other life goals to focus on training. And of course, it wasn't just effort by me. Many people, including my family, friends, and others, helped me along that journey. When I toed the start line of my first Olympics, I was 35 years old, so quite old by athletic standards. And during all that time, 24 years, I could have been pushed off or fallen off that development pathway for any number of reasons, even though back then I was lucky enough to enjoy female-only sport, unlike girls and women today. There were numerous occasions when I thought I'd reached the end of the road with that development pathway and I would just have to give up, but I persevered and eventually made it to Olympic level. I just want to give you a few examples of how the development pathway can be so hit and miss. So I earned my first GB vest in 1997 for the European Cross-Country Championships, and I earned that place by a fraction of a second because I dipped ahead of a rival on the finish line at the trials race. I got selected and she missed out. At the Europeans, I came 38th, which was nothing special, but being on a team with other good British athletes and good European athletes, that really opened my eyes to what I had to do to reach the top. My first attempt to qualify for a global championship in the marathon ended in failure. So that was the April 2004 London Marathon. I was trying to qualify for the Athens Olympics, but I finished 7th out of all the Brits, and I didn't get the qualifying time, so I didn't make it. But I crossed the finish line and thought, I just know I can do better than that. If I just keep trying, I can do better than that. So at my second attempt, I snuck in by 8 seconds. I qualified by 8 seconds, and because of that, managed to go to the World Championships in Helsinki of 2005. You might have heard of an athlete called Paula Radcliffe. Yeah. Luckily for me, I was on her team. She finished first, and I finished 18th in that race. But since she won it, we managed to get a team bronze medal. Also in that year, 2005, I was the first athlete at the trials for the World Cross Country Championships not to be picked. But then at the last minute, there was a withdrawal from the team, and I did get picked. So I was the last and slowest member of the team, but on the day, I managed to be the first Brit to finish. So this was a massive confidence boost, and again, it was an opportunity to hang out with elite athletes and learn from them. In 2007, just before the World Championships, which was held in Osaka in Japan, I got the flu, but I managed to recover just in time and finished 9th in that race. But finishing 9th meant I was the first athlete not to win any prize money. So this is what it's like trying to earn a living as an athlete. You can be the 9th best athlete in the world and win nothing after running 26.2 miles. In an event like the marathon, a lot of your income can be dependent on 2 or 3 days per year. Obviously, if you have a kit sponsor, that is through the year, but competition is a big part of your income. Just before the Beijing Olympics, which is when I finished 6th, I had a bone stress response, and I thought my Olympics was over. I had to rest for several days, which just before the Olympics is quite stressful. But I managed to race, thankfully, but it was very touch and go. So I hope these examples show you how precarious it is. When you watch the Olympics or the World Championships or a big event, it all looks so fabulous and glamorous, and the athletes look amazing, and they do amazing things. But actually, there's so much hard work behind the scenes, and so much of it is just precarious. And when athletes fall off that development pathway, we never hear about them again. That's it. We just don't see them. So that brings me on to males competing in the female category, which obviously destroys the development pathway for females. We saw recently that Hannah Arensman quit cycling altogether after being shoved, deliberately, literally and metaphorically, by male Austin Killips at the US Cyclocross Nationals. And then at the Tour of the Gila, Killips won part of the women's prize money, which for the first time was equal to that for the men. So as a result of that, one or more female cyclists won less prize money because of his inclusion in the female category. So their path along the development pathway is more difficult with less money. Every time a male competes in women's sport, he takes from not one but many female athletes things of value which otherwise would help them to progress along that pathway, such as medals, points, qualifications, and so on. But also less tangible things like self-confidence and a feeling of self-worth. Right now, female athletes are being impeded and obstructed and pushed off that development pathway by males. I want to give you an example from the recent World Para Athletics Championships. Obviously, this is elite level, but it illustrates very well how the effect of males in the female category on female athletes. So Valentina Petrillo from Italy ran in the 200 and 400 at this championships in the T12 category for visually impaired athletes. He's a 49-year-old male, and I've read in the press that he's a married father of 2 as well. And in the 200, so he won bronze medals in both events. In the 200, Indonesia's Ni Made Arianti Putri did not advance from the semi-final into the final. Did not advance from the heats to the semi-finals. And Spain's Melanie Games did not advance to the final. In the 400, Brazil's Lorraine Gomez did not advance to the final. And Morocco's Fatima El Idrisi finished 4th and did not win the bronze medal. These are all direct consequences of Petrillo's inclusion in the female category. In addition to that, most of the women in both events finished in a worse finish position in the heats, semis, and finals. Furthermore, if Petrillo had been competing in the category of his sex at birth, he would not have qualified for these championships. The men's qualification in the 400s was 54.5 seconds. His PB is 58 point something, so he would have been 3.5 seconds, which is a long way in 400-meter running, outside the qualification standard. And in an interview with the BBC a few years ago, he said, "It's better for me to be a slow, happy woman than a fast, unhappy man." And I mentioned this to a family member a couple of days ago, and he said, actually, it's the opposite of that. As a woman, he's fast, and as a man, he's slow. So this is another example of black is white, up is down. It's complete 180 of the truth and reality. He also says, I don't feel like I'm stealing anything from anyone. But those female athletes I've just listed have had things stolen from them. So coming back to my development pathway, if at any point in those 24 years it took me to reach the Olympics, I'd had to face unfair competition against one or more males, I'm certain that, like Hannah, I would have quit, not just the pathway, but sport altogether. So to anyone listening who is enabling males competing in the female category, I ask you this. Where do you think elite female athletes of the future are going to come from? We've already lost Hannah Rensman and countless other women who none of us will ever have heard of. So do you want all women on the development pathway to elite level to quit before you protect the female category and remove males from it? Another point I want to make about the development pathway is that you must have fairness and safety for female athletes across all sports. So I only began running really seriously at age 18 when I went to university. I didn't do anything of note during my childhood, never competed at even county level, never mind regional or national level. Instead, I did a lot of other sports, including swimming, hockey, netball. And doing these sports laid the foundations for my later career as an endurance runner. So for me to stay on that pathway to Olympic level required all of those sports to have fair and safe competition. If any of them had allowed males into the female category, I certainly would have quit. And this isn't just about competition. The swimming pool where I did all my training is called the Ferry Centre in Oxford, and it's now under pressure from the City Council, which passed a trans-inclusion motion a few months back, that it must have gender-neutral changing rooms. So as a small girl going to swimming training many times a week, if I'd had to set eyes on a naked male in the changing rooms without my consent, as Riley and the other swimmers have had to, I certainly, or even just the knowledge that at any moment a male could walk in and there was nothing I could do about it, I certainly would have quit. And beyond the actual experience of being naked around males, the message this sends, that you and your safety, privacy, and dignity don't matter, would have had a really appalling effect on me. I'm certain of that. I just don't understand why we're forcing women and girls in sport to share spaces where they're vulnerable with males, given that we know that males are responsible for over 90% of sexual and violent crimes. So we now have a situation where some sports have protected the female category while others haven't. And girls and young women who enjoy sport or have aspirations to go far in sport, and their parents, will be watching carefully to see which sports protect them and which throw them under the bus. And why would any talented, sporty young woman in the US now, deciding which sport to focus on, choose cycling, in which there are over 50 men competing in the female category? I know that the UCI has now acted to protect the female category, but we're yet to see what USA Cycling will do. So sports which enable these men are literally killing their own sports for women. And keep in mind also that mothers are key to deciding what their children do and how family budgets are spent. So if you push mothers out of sports, their children, both boys and girls, will leave too. So eventually these governing bodies will be killing their sports for men too. And I really don't know why any governing body would want to do that. So the second main reason why I think the female category must be female only at all levels and ages is this. In saying sport must be female only at elite level, what you're effectively saying to women and girls is, if you're good at sport, okay, you can have fairness, but for all others, tough. If you weren't so bad at sport, you might have got fairness. But because you aren't very good, you have to earn fairness, unlike all the men and boys who, of course, get fairness at all levels. Suck it up and just train harder is what we've heard before. And yeah, that's you know, if you train harder, you might become good enough to deserve fairness. If you haven't already seen it, I strongly recommend a little film called Train Harder by Francis Aaron. His Twitter handle is @Francis, FRANCIS AARON UK. It's his pinned tweet. He's got a little video about train harder, girls. It's very good. So what kind of message does this send to women and girls who are not elite? I hope you'll agree with me that it's an appalling one. It says that the feelings of men and boys are more important, you and your sporting activities have no value, any aspirations you may have to reach elite level will be obstructed by men and boys because the governing bodies can't get their acts together to provide fair and safe competition for you. Men and boys, unlike you, will get fairness at all levels simply because they are male. We all know that without fairness, sport is nothing, and yet all over the world, sports bodies have thrown away fairness for females below elite level. Again, this is something I just cannot understand. Beyond the message this sends to women and girls, there are practical issues also which make this a nonsense. So I want to give you an example of an event which shows this. Earlier this year, in the UK, we held an event called the English National Cross Country Running Championship. So cross country running national championship. And in the senior women's race, there were 773 finishers. And in the men's race, there were 1,473 finishers. So if you haven't seen the start of a cross country race, it's quite something. I recommend you have a look. You imagine 1,400 men on one start line setting off running. And 700 women, it's quite something. So at the front of these races, they're elite athletes. I won this race in 1998, just after I raced for Great Britain at the European Championships, which I mentioned earlier. But at the back, they're absolutely not elite. So where do you draw the line? You know, you can't. Elite and non-elite athletes are competing in the same race. In this year's senior women's race, a male finished well inside the top third, pushing more than 500 actual females down the finishing order into a worse result, and most of them will be non-elite. And do we say that this is fine because this male wasn't near the front, or do we say that over 500 non-elite women being bumped down is okay? Some of the women behind this male would have been elite masters athletes, and do they not matter? Many women in this race wouldn't aspire to elite level. They race for enjoyment, for their clubs, and every one of those 772 women suffered unfair competition because of that male's inclusion. So now I want to talk about parkrun now. This is a good illustration of what happens if you allow gender self-ID at grassroots level. So the Brits in the room will know what parkrun is, but for everybody else, it's a 5-kilometre run in parks all over the UK, held every Saturday at 9 a.m. It's free and it's run by volunteers, and it also exists in some other countries. Officially, it's not a race, but it has measured courses, timekeepers, official results in descending order of speed, records, categories, age grade percentage scores, and other trappings of competition. It's not licensed by UK Athletics. It's an extremely successful and much loved grassroots phenomenon in sport. And massive numbers of non-elite women join it every week. But parkrun allows gender self-ID, so this means that any male can just register as female and off they go. They have 4 categories: male, female, another gender identity, and prefer not to say. So here are some of the effects of this policy. So at least 2 outright and 18 age group female course records are held by males. Many of these records are out of female hands forever, I estimate. One of these female age group records is faster than the men's equivalent record. One of these trans-identifying males recently ran 10K, this is not at parkrun, in a separate event, nearly 2 minutes faster than the female winner in the same age group of the World Masters Championships 10K in March this year. And many of the females who would have held these records are elite or former elite athletes. And all of them have been erased from being recognized as the real holders of these records. Males can retroactively change their gender to female at parkrun. So by doing this, males could take female records with the click of a mouse, and there's nothing, not even training harder, that females can do about it. An unremarkable male recently switched his gender from male to female, and on entering the female category scored an impressive 90% age grade score, but for the same time in the male category, it would have been a fairly average 70%. This shot him up to the top of that parkrun's age grade league, in much the same way as our friend Will Thomas shot himself up from mediocre male to winning an NCAA title. But importantly, this parkrun policy now negatively affects males as well, because the age grade league is a joint male and female league. So everybody gets an age grade percentage score, which is relative to the world record in your age group. So if you're very good, you'll be in the 90%, less good, 80%, so on. But it's a mixed league. So one of these males who is participating in the female category is at the top of 4 age grade leagues at different parkruns. And in one of them, he's bumped down one of the UK's best ever athletes, who is a man, 2-time Olympian, 5 times World Masters champion. So this man has been bumped down the age grade league by this male participating in the female category. The notion that fairness matters at elite level but not lower down is also shown to be a nonsense if we look at age, because in some sports, such as ice skating, swimming, and tennis, female athletes under 18, so minors, are the elite athletes. So do they get fairness because they're elite or not because they're minors? You know, you can't answer it. Similarly, for masters athletes, when I came 6th in the Beijing Olympics, I was a masters athlete. I was 35. The other British woman, only one other British woman has finished 6th in the Olympics, and that was Priscilla Welch at the 84 Olympics, so a competitor of Lorraine's at that event. And she was 39 on that day. She held the British record and won the New York Marathon when she was 42. Kira D'Amato has just broken the US half marathon record at age 38. So if we say our masters athletes don't deserve fairness, we're going to be throwing away achievements of elite athletes. So I want to talk a bit more about masters athletes now, because I think they're the group who perhaps suffer most from males in the female category. Many find themselves able to spend more time and energy on themselves after their children have left home. But they'll never be elite, as in kind of open elite athletes at senior level, but many aspire to be elite masters athletes, and they're very competitive. But because many males who transition are in middle age, female masters athletes, as their rivals, really suffer. I know of numerous female masters athletes in the UK who've lost medals, records, podium places, better finish positions, and prizes to males in their category. One female masters athlete who's had to race against men for 8 years contacted me last year on the point of quitting. And interestingly, she had spent time studying start lists of races to avoid races that men were competing in, exactly the same as what we heard from Holly earlier. With my encouragement, she complained and thankfully has stayed in athletics and has become a vocal defender of the female category. But furthermore, female masters athletes have to train and compete despite the symptoms and effects of menopause, which of course no male athlete ever has to deal with. And if they want to take HRT with a minuscule amount of testosterone in it to relieve their symptoms, they can't, because testosterone is banned in and out of competition under the WADA code. And WADA does not allow, this is my understanding, WADA does not allow therapeutic use exemptions for testosterone for females. But yet the males who identify as women and compete against them can, quote unquote, forget their testosterone suppression medication because there's really no robust testing system in place. In this context, I discovered recently that Kristen Worley, the Canadian athlete that we heard about from Linda Blade, managed to get a TUE, so born male, had surgery, then got a TUE for testosterone to compete in the female category. And yet female athletes are not allowed TUEs for testosterone at all, which, I mean, how do you square that one? I don't know. So in the UK, it is masters level female athletes who've suffered most from males in the female category in running. And thankfully, UK Athletics banned post-puberty males from the female category at the end of March this year. And we thought that would be the end of it, but males have continued racing in the female category. Some of them, I think, are under the transitional arrangements which UKA provided, which said that if they had been in full compliance with the previous testosterone suppression rules and had entered races before the 31st of March, they could still compete. But here we are, we're nearly at the end of July. Last Wednesday, so 3 days ago, a male finished third in the female category. Sunday, a week ago, a male won a female category event. This is all recreational level running in the UK. I want to give you an example now about the numbers. So we hear that, at elite level it must be fair, but lower down let's be inclusive. But the number of athletes competing at elite level is absolutely minuscule compared to the total number of female athletes competing. So let me give you an example. At this year's London Marathon, organisers said that the elite, championship and good for age categories, so championship is the good British athletes, good for age is the good masters athletes, that those categories were held under World Athletics rules, and that meant no trans-identifying males in the female category. But when you look up the results, the championship and good for age runners are all just lumped in with the mass race. You can't distinguish who were championship athletes and who were good for age athletes. They're all just lumped in with the mass race. And a trans-identifying male, Glenn Frank, calls himself Glenique when he feels like a woman, ran in the female category in London. So we know that this was in the mass race. We know from his participation that any man who says he's a woman is welcome in the female category in the mass race. And London Marathon defended this as, and I quote, a unique celebration of inclusivity and humanity. So if you do the maths, so that means that only the elite women had male-free fair competition. There were 13 elite female finishers, and in the mass race there were 20,197 finishers. That obviously includes Frank and any other males who were there. So if you do the maths, you arrive at a number of females who enjoyed fair competition on that day of 0.06%. So how anybody justifies that, I just don't know. We all know that girls and young women drop out of sport at alarming rates, especially teenage girls. And this isn't just about sport, it's about physical and mental health, about the cost to all of us of promoting good public health. And forcing women and girls at non-elite level to suffer unfair and unsafe competition simply makes the situation worse. So I hope that going forward, and if anyone listening has the power in a governing body or are an event organizer, have the power to make rules about categories, I strongly urge you to ensure that it's going to be female only at all levels. Before I finish, I want to just address 2 or 3 points that we've heard in the last couple of days. So the first is, and in fact we saw it on one of Greg's slides just now, that the the male-female performance gap increases with age. So once you're into the 40s, 50s, 60s, the gap is getting bigger. So when you hear things like the male-female performance gap in running is 10%, in swimming it's 10 to 12%, that gap actually gets bigger with age. And also, a friend of mine did some analysis on the London Marathon results this year and discovered that at elite and near elite level, the gap was 10%. But below that, the gap widened massively, and it got bigger the slower the athletes were. So we heard from Ross Tucker that he doesn't want to do his presentation for a third time. So it would be wonderful if he and Emma didn't have to do it again this time next year. But I think we all want them to come back. So I would love it if they would address the increasing male-female performance gap, which increases with age. The second thing I want to mention is we've heard a lot in the last couple of days about the physical effects, the physical aspects of sport. We haven't heard much about the psychology of sport, and mental preparation is everything in sport. And I spent a lot of work preparing myself mentally for racing, to the point where I had a sports psychologist working with me, and I wrote, with her help, a detailed pre-race routine of what I would do at every moment. And the time before a race, whether that's the 30 seconds before a race, or the 5 minutes, or an hour, or 24 hours before a race, this time is so important for preparing yourself mentally. And over time, I developed a plan which worked for me to prepare myself mentally for what was coming, and it served me very well. When I hear about what Riley Gaines and her friends went through, that time before a race, when you're supposed to be preparing yourself mentally, these young women had to think, am I going to face a male penis in the female changing rooms? This does two things. Number one, makes them have that worry and that anxiety before a race, which they should never have had to deal with. But two, it distracts them from doing what they should be doing, which is mentally preparing for the race. So maybe that's another topic for next year's agenda. So finally, before I finish, I just want to mention another topic which I think has not had the attention it deserves, and this is coaching. So in the context of gender ideology. So let me give you an example. Supposing you're the coach of a women's soccer team or rugby team, and you discover that your team is going to have to play a team with a male on it. What do? Do you just go ahead and play the match as if nothing is different? Do you boycott the match? Do you speak to your athletes? If you speak to them, what are you going to say? If one of your female athletes gets injured, are you liable? So I think there's a huge amount of gender ideology which affects coaching. Another thing I've noticed is trans-identifying males, or certainly Killips and Petrillo, wear dangly earrings while they're competing. So as a coach, is this what elite performance is about now? And Leah Thomas, one of Leah Thomas's performances, I'm not sure if it was Ross or Emma, but one of them did analysis of his split times in one of the events. And it was absolutely obvious from these splits that he was sandbagging and then sped up in the last 50 meters, I think it was, of a 200. What does this mean about coaching? Are coaches now supposed to coach athletes to sandbag to make it all look normal? If you're the coach of a female athlete up against these male athletes, how do you prepare your female athlete for that? And if we look at the Rio 2016 800 meters, there are three athletes should have been on the podium and weren't. What about the coaches of those athletes? They have never been recognized as being the coaches of Olympic medal winning athletes. There's a big loss for them as well. So I hope, Ross mentioned also that in cycling, everything is about power to weight. And I was thrilled to hear Catherine Deeves talk about overweight males earlier. Because having come from a sport where your body weight is everything, power to weight is everything, to see overweight males competitive and winning in female events just makes me so furious. Because this is not elite performance at all. People say, oh, you're fat shaming if you say overweight males. No, this is about physics. This is about carrying a mass over a certain distance. It's about elite performance. Maybe that's another agenda item. Okay, I'll stop there because I'm sure you're all very hungry.